Welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I know that money touches almost every part of our lives, yet so many of us grow up really talking openly about it. But I also know that most people are curious about how other people manage their money. They are not being nosy, they actually just want to learn. So in this podcast, I sit down with everyday people from all walks of life and I ask them to share the honest stories behind their financial decisions that have helped them reach the financial point they are at today. Now, most want to remain anonymous, and that's perfectly okay, but they still want to share their story because every single one of the 100 plus people I've interviewed says, I wish I learned this sooner. So my hope is that by sharing real experiences from real Kiwis, you learn something. These conversations will help you feel a little more informed and, most importantly to me, inspired to actually act and think differently about your own financial journey. So let's crack on. Today's episode was inspired by an email from Anna, which is not her real name, who lives and works in Te Waipounamu, which is the South Island. She knows me to be quite straightforward in most matters, and she emailed me because she wondered about my thoughts on the cost of living increases we are all experiencing. Anna and her partner Thom, also not his real name, they bike to work every day in the dark if necessary, through both summer and winter weather, and she made an interesting point. She said that she finds that sometimes when life gets more expensive, the answer isn't just to complain louder, sometimes it's to get more creative. And she should know because after spending 6 years in tertiary study, she had become incredibly used to living on very little. Developing strong budgeting habits and practical life skills wasn't optional, it was a critical part of what allowed her to stay at university and make her finances work. Now, before anyone panics, this episode isn't about pretending that everyone can suddenly sell their car and ride an e-bike through the countryside, although Anna would probably say that actually many of you could if you made the conscious choice to do that. But what we are talking about today is the idea that small changes, lifestyle tweaks, and the occasional big, bold financial move and a willingness to try something different, it can make a surprisingly big financial difference over time. This young 29-year-old is pretty sharp when it comes to living below her means, but even she fell into the societal trap of taking on a big mortgage to make money, and I'm very happy to share the story of how she got out of that situation, and she found another way. Much like the rest of us, over the last couple of years, Anna had found that her costs were rising too, but she's not letting that put her off her game. She is rethinking spending habits altogether, budgeting really well, and is part of a new generation coming through who doesn't see housing as a way to riches. Instead, they see it as a hassle, and instead they are successfully investing in the share market. Anna and her partner Thom are a couple adapting early. They're really hard workers who have a problem-solving mindset, even when it might have felt a little inconvenient at first. And as you are about to hear, it's financially paying dividends. But before I really get started, a message from today's fabulous sponsor. Okay, you've got me, I'll admit it, I'm the money nerd in our household. I genuinely enjoy keeping a very close eye on Pocketsmith as it tracks our retirement funds, our investments, the value of our home, and of course the daily flow of money into our mini bank accounts. The details fascinate me, numbers fascinate me. But my husband Johnny, not so much. He just wants to know we're doing okay, but he is just not interested in all those details. We both think of money differently. Pocketsmith is aware of this as it lets me create a custom dashboard that shows Johnny the same information I see, but differently, in far less detail, meaning he still gets to play an active role in our joint financial planning using information that makes sense to him. If you have a spouse trying to opt out of talking about your money, I think Pocketsmith might be the secret weapon to bring you together and foster healthy conversations around money in your home. If you want to supercharge your finances with Pocketsmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of Pocketsmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/the happy saver. That's pocketsmith.com/the happy saver. For this episode, I had a long and interesting kōrero just with Anna, so it's her story that you will hear most about today, with details about Thom from time to time. The youngest of two, she was born and grew up in a small rural South Island town, And a country girl at heart, it seems, even though she now lives in a larger city, she remains close to her roots. And I asked Anna if she had a sense of money growing up, whether that be rich, poor, or average, and if she recalls any standout childhood money moments. She remembers that her parents, both health professionals, were able to live on her father's single income while her mum was a stay-at-home mother, until Anna started school at 5 years old when she went back into part-time work. Now, while there was no paid parental leave, her job was actually held for her to go back to. And this meant that apart from 1 or 2 visits to kindergarten, she didn't have to go into daycare or preschool, and she is very grateful for all the time spent with her parents and sibling when she was so young. She fondly remembers trolley rides up and down the aisles at the supermarket, picking out interesting and alternative products, such as milk in a plastic bag that you decanted into a bottle instead of the more expensive bottled milk, and she came to learn that her mum was a savvy shopper and good at finding a deal that would save the family money. Living on one income with a mortgage on their whare, she grew up knowing that it was important to manage money well, and she never felt they went without. And she sounded like she was loved, had a good roof over her head, and food in the cupboards. And the food they ate was always home-cooked, with baking in the tins, fruits and veggies mostly homegrown, and plenty of meat in the freezer, given they lived in a rural area and could grow and hunt their own meat. Anna grew up watching her parents grow and literally hunt their own food, so she saw the effort that went into creating it, so she knew that you didn't waste food. Her parents divided up the running of the family, and while her dad worked full-time to bring in the income, her mum handled childcare, the cooking and cleaning, which might sound stereotypical, but it was just life, and given they both had a strong work ethic, both of them leaned into their respective jobs during that time. So she was raised in a family where you got things done, no matter your age, and if you sat around, you were given a job to do. It sounds like no one in the household was ever idle, whether doing DIY, cleaning, cooking, gardening, sewing, or helping out in their home or in their community. Anna didn't get weekly pocket money. Instead, if she did actual work, she might get paid for that, teaching her that money came from mahi, and it was pretty simple. If you didn't do the jobs assigned to you because for whatever reason you didn't want to, well, you didn't get paid. She was fortunate that her grandparents were a big part of her life, and her grandmothers in particular taught her the importance of good food and nutrition from a very young age. They never ate out, there simply wasn't the need, and the expense of doing so just wasn't worth it to them. Holidays were more cheaply done, but enjoyable nonetheless by visiting whānau friends in other places. And she remembers that her parents worked hard, both at home and at work, so whether paid or unpaid, they taught her the value of making an effort, whatever you do. Anna lived rurally, where the distances to and from things were far too great, and the only way to get places was by car, so her mum in particular spent lots of time over her school years ferrying her and her older sibling around. And it never crossed her mind to bike anywhere, and these days, with the wisdom of being a bit older, it speaks to her of the New Zealand culture around individual car use as the only way to do anything. And it was only much later that a passing comment from someone and reading Mr. Money Mustache made her question the assumption that you just drive everywhere, and it made her get on a bike. And currently, with high fuel prices, she is happier than ever that she made the switch years ago. I asked what was one piece of advice, either good or bad, that her parents taught her. She knows that her parents were very good at saving up and paying cash if they wanted to buy something. And how did she know this? Her dad's running commentary when he saw an ad on TV offering finance to pay for a holiday was a clue. And he would be saying, "This is a terrible idea to take on debt to have a holiday. You should save up and then go on holiday." So as a family, they did use a credit card, and he taught Anna that if she did ever have one herself, it doesn't matter what the statement says about a minimum payment. It is really important to pay it off fully each month, and that way you avoid paying interest. Now, I just want to chip in here with my 2 cents because I don't want to create the impression that you reach a point in life where you have to get a credit card. You simply don't. For the vast majority of people, myself included, a debit card will suffice. When Anna was close to starting university, her dad gave her a talk about banks and interest rates, explaining the differences between borrowing versus saving, and advising her to shop around banks and compare their offers and ask questions. And I like the point he was making that, much like any other service or product, you shop around and you change if necessary. Apart from these specific examples, she said that money was not talked about much. But I can tell from what she said that good money skills were displayed in most of what they did anyway. There is a saying that when it comes to money, more is caught from watching and observing your parents and peers than specifically taught, which is why, as parents, it is so important that money is something that is calmly managed and discussed at home. You show that you have control over it, not the other way around. Anna got her first job in 2010 at her dad's work as a cleaner when she was just 14 years old. She was on minimum wage, plus she did some intermittent babysitting for cash, and she saved her weekly wages and soon got herself a bank account with an EFTPOS card. And to show just how tuned into money Anna already was as a teenager, she shared an interesting story with me. When she was a baby, one set of grandparents deposited $1,000 for her into a bank account. Anna always knew about it, which I think is brilliant, because the letters arrived addressed to her, and importantly, she actually kept them and paid attention to them. Then at around age 15, while chatting with a friend on the school bus about tax rates, as you do, she suddenly realised that because she was a student, she should probably have been on a lower tax rate for the interest earned on that money. And she was right, and today the rate would be 10.5%. So she dug out the paperwork and discovered the account had been taxed at 33% the entire time. So Anna rang the bank herself and said, "You've been charging me too much tax for 15 years. So they immediately changed the rate, but the damage was already done. Still, it taught her an important lesson very early in life about how tax and money actually work, and it literally pays to pay attention. What stood out to me most was that she knew the investment existed, she actually read the letters, saved the paperwork, asked questions, and then took action herself. And that level of financial awareness at such a young age is pretty special. Often parents or grandparents put money aside for children, but never tell them about it because they worry that the child will become entitled or careless. Instead, they plan to surprise them with it later in life, but I personally think that can sometimes backfire. Because Anna always knew about the money and watched it slowly grow over the years, she developed a genuine understanding of how compounding works, how long wealth building takes, and how tax can quietly eat into your returns. That money felt important to her because she had seen its entire journey. If a lump sum simply appears out of nowhere in young adulthood, there's often far less understanding of the time, the patience, and the discipline that went into growing it. Which is why I'm a big believer in involving kids in money conversations early. That's where the real lesson lies. At year 12 at school, Anna picked up a retail job working every Sunday, and yes, it took up 50% of her weekend, but it was something that she really wanted to do, and she wanted to earn some money because she knew she was going to go to university. And because she was a good worker, this was a job she was to return to every holiday once she started at uni. Now, jobs like this are like gold dust and such a help to a university student who has irregular holidays and plenty of them. Being able to step straight into paid work was a real stroke of good fortune for Anna. In year 12, Anna had a second-hand phone and was saving up for a new one, but out of the blue, her parents surprised her and her sibling with a brand new iPhone. She said they sometimes treated her quite unexpectedly with a gift that was useful. She kept that phone all the way until her third year of university when it finally broke, and she paid a $500 insurance excess to have it replaced. She had been paying for contents insurance at university to cover her phone and her laptop, reinforcing her habit of taking good care of what she owned. While an iPhone is an extravagant expense though, alongside this, Anna still rarely buys new tech or clothes. She's developed a love for op shopping instead to keep her costs low. When Anna was in her final years of high school, she became interested in studying healthcare. She described herself as quite nerdy with a love of human biology and was one of the fortunate few who knew what career they wanted to head into. She also had a memorable teacher who was quirky, full of stories, and very practical when it came to talking about university, and he regularly told the class about former students who had won scholarships and stressed how important they were for offsetting the cost of study. But the point that really stuck with Anna was when he explained how many people simply never apply for scholarships at all, leaving money sitting there unclaimed. He even shared a story about a student who was the only applicant for a scholarship and got the money simply because they made the effort to apply. And then he asked the class a simple question. How many hours would you need to work to earn $1,000 compared to the time it takes to apply for a $1,000 scholarship? So that really hit home for Anna. Untaxed money just for filling out an application. So in her final year at school, it was game on, and she started Googling scholarships with the goal of applying for as many as possible. In her first year alone, she was awarded 7 scholarships, and she didn't stop there. Every year throughout her 6 years of study, she kept searching, reapplying, and looking for new opportunities. In total, she ended up receiving $53,000 worth of scholarships. Now, her approach was actually very simple. She would search terms like tertiary scholarships along with her region, university, her iwi, her course of study, the year level she was at, and her personal interests. Scholarships are often split into categories like school leavers, undergraduate students, postgraduate students, and specific areas of study. Anna built herself a Google Doc listing what was available, when applications opened, and what she was eligible for. Then, each year, she would revisit it all and apply again. And when it came to the cost of university, Anna said she doesn't really remember having detailed conversations about how it would all be paid for. Her older sibling had taken out a student loan, and in Anna's mind, this was simply what people did. And in my mind, this is how tertiary students wander blindly into debt. So in 2015, she went into university with cash savings from her years of working, with no real expectation that anyone would help financially, and probably without fully understanding just how expensive it would all be either. She was simply trying to do the best she could with the money that she had available. But then something unexpected happened. Her father had inherited some money, and he used part of that inheritance to pay for Anna's first year in the Hall of Residence. She hadn't expected that at all and felt incredibly grateful because it was a significant expense covered for her. Now, our daughter is in a Hall of Residence currently, and the cost in 2026 is about $23,000. Not cheap. So with her accommodation and meals paid for, scholarships arriving throughout the year to cover her fees, holiday work, plus cash savings of her own, Anna made a very deliberate decision not to take out a student loan in her first year. As she put it, her logical brain simply thought, well, I already have the money, so why would I borrow it? But, interestingly, and I hear this all the time when interviewing people about money, what people think they did financially and what they actually did are often two different things. And when Anna later looked back through her records, she realised that that was true for her too. She was certain she hadn't taken living costs through the student loan scheme, but realised during our korero that she had been receiving about $170 a week into her bank account. She hadn't borrowed for course fees, scholarships had covered those, but she had taken the living costs portion despite not needing it. And make no mistake, she was going into student loan debt to the tune of $170 per week. Because she spent very little and had very few wants, much of that $170 simply sat in her bank account, and by the end of the year, she had moved a chunk of it into a term deposit. Looking back, Anna thinks perhaps she took the student loan living costs just in case, especially being away from home for the first time, and because the interest-free messaging around student loans was so incredibly strong. The theory often goes that if money is interest-free, you should borrow it and invest your own cash instead, which is great in theory, but it is much harder in practice because most young people have never been taught how to invest properly in the first place. And I'm not talking about Anna specifically here, but I do think we've become far too casual in New Zealand about encouraging students to just take the loan. I've interviewed far too many former students who ended up with large student loans but no investments or assets to show for it. And for many people, particularly women who may take time out of the workforce for children, those debts can take decades to clear. Anna was disciplined enough not to spend the money she borrowed, but if she had her time again, she says she simply wouldn't take it because she didn't actually need it. And honestly, I think she is right. I asked Anna if there was anything she wished someone had taught her earlier about money. And interestingly, while she learned younger than most people, she still wishes someone had properly explained index funds or ETFs and long-term investing sooner. Fortunately for her, at around the age of 20, her uncle introduced her to the idea of compounding returns after her dad pointed her in his direction for investing advice. Her uncle researched simple investment options and suggested two very new investment providers at that time, which was InvestNow or Sharesies. An alternative was SmartShares, but it felt a bit more intimidating for a beginner. So Anna started investing using InvestNow at the age of just 21. She admits now that she lacked confidence and was really just testing the waters, which is entirely normal when you are doing something brand new. I meet 50-year-olds just starting out who say the same thing now. Her grandparents had shared stories about the 1987 New Zealand share market crash, including how her grandfather lost much of their retirement savings in shares, and those stories stuck with Anna, leaving her wondering, how do I know this won't happen to me too? Thankfully, her uncle understood passive investing and low fees. Having used Vanguard funds in America himself, he was much more familiar with investing and encouraged her towards a diversified index fund instead of individual shares. It went wrong for a lot of people in 1987 because they were all in on individual companies, which then collapsed. Being around someone who was not fearful of the share market, though, who encouraged her to buy a fund that owned thousands of companies, was a huge opportunity, one that most people don't get, because here in New Zealand, there is a diminishing but still ever-present misunderstanding and scepticism around share investing. But she made a solid start and she chose the Vanguard International Shares Select Exclusion Index Fund through InvestNow, which currently has a 5-year gross return of almost 16% and a 0.2% fee with a 0.06 buy and sell fee. It is a slightly active index fund, which is an ESG fund, in the fact that it excludes some sectors. For it to be entirely passive, it would need to just buy everything. At first, she invested just the minimum $250 plus $50 every quarter because she was a university student by then and she didn't have much spare money. But over time, and as her confidence grew, she increased her contributions to $50 a month instead. And I really like this part of her story because people often think you need thousands of dollars to start investing, but you don't. In fact, I think it's better to start investing when you don't have much because it creates a habit that you can scale up over time. And much like she watched the $1,000 koha from her grandparents evolve over time, it was to be the same with this. Back then, InvestNow had far fewer investment options than it does today, which Anna now thinks was probably a good thing, and I agree, because there was less noise and less opportunity to overthink things. Thanks to the guidance of her uncle, she started small, she invested consistently, and learned that share market ups and downs are completely normal. So although she now realised there was another way to grow wealth, there was still a strong belief that buying a house was the real key to getting ahead financially. Her parents always taught her that you worked hard and you bought a home as early as possible and then you paid it off fast. So even when she was a university student, Anna was living on as little as possible and protecting her savings in the bank with the goal of buying a house one day, sooner rather than later. Now, we went on to talk about student life, something that is very relevant to me as our daughter is currently a uni student. Anna knows there are people who are natural-born savers and she considers herself to be one of them. She had never formally budgeted or tracked her spending, but her core principle was simple: spend as little as possible and avoid wasting both money and resources. Now that the cost of living has shot up lately, these core skills are still helpful. In her second year of university, aged just 19 and now living in her first shared flat, all her flatmates cooked separately and regularly bought takeaways for themselves. But Anna went in the opposite direction. Instead of buying new things for her room, she furnished it mostly from donated items, and when her parents unexpectedly and very generously gave her $150 cash as a parting gift, she spent $120 of it on a small second-hand freezer from Trade Me. And that little freezer became central to how she managed her food costs. A friend from first year had already been flatting and taught her about meal prepping, batch cooking meals, freezing single portions and reheating them later, and Anna adopted the system immediately. Growing up, almost all her meals had been home-cooked and nutritious, and eating out was extremely rare, so this way of living already felt normal to her. While many of her friends were getting takeaways multiple times a week, Anna could count on one hand how often she ate out in an entire year. Instead, she walked or biked to the supermarket on the bike her parents had given her for Christmas and bought basic staples like rice, pasta, oats, mince, chicken, frozen vegetables, fruit and milk. And she would cook in batches and reheat meals in the microwave on campus for lunch. So technically she was still eating out, the difference being that she had taken her food with her. And while she didn't particularly enjoy cooking in a tiny cold student flat with no dishwasher, it saved plenty of both time and money in the long run, time that she could devote to her study. Now, at the time, she spent about $35 a week on groceries, which is probably closer to about $50 a week in today's money. And she really spent money on alcohol, which is so expensive when you are a student. Her rent was about $120 a week for a room in a 5-person student flat, and that's about $170 today. And living with others is certainly the best way to reduce those rental costs. But importantly and fortunately, her parents helped her by covering her rent throughout university, while Anna paid for her own food, power, internet, and all those day-to-day expenses. And it wasn't until halfway through university that Anna found herself around more environmentally minded people, and for the first time, she really started thinking about her car use. Now, it was one comment in particular that stuck with her. Someone questioned whether, quote, it really made sense for a healthy, fit, 60-kilogram person with functioning legs to use a 2-ton metal box powered by a finite fossil fuel resource just to get themselves up a hill. Anna said the logic of that statement genuinely landed with her, and within a few weeks she had largely switched to leaving her wee car at home and biking or using public transport instead, and that comment has stayed with her ever since. During university, Anna moved flats a couple of times before settling into the same place for the remainder of university. By then, she had discovered what she considered her ideal student setup, which was a studio-style room where each person rented their own room on an individual contract while sharing kitchen and bathroom facilities. Power, internet and cleaning were all included, which she loved because it removed a lot of the conversation and admin that often came with flatting. In her final years, she paid around $230 to $240 a week and felt it was cost-effective for the simplicity it actually provided. She was still meal prepping the entire time too, and by then her little freezer had become such an essential part of her system that it literally lived in her bedroom alongside a microwave, a kettle and a fridge. One of her flatmates even adopted the same batch cooking and freezing system after seeing how well it worked, and I've already told my daughter that this is something that she should think about too. And in what Anna considers one of her better financial wins, she eventually sold that very same freezer in 2025 for $100, which is only $20 less than what she originally paid for it years earlier. Anna's university years were pretty simple and low cost. No music festivals or regular concerts. The one memorable event was seeing Ed Sheeran with her mum and sibling in her 4th year, and they all squeezed into her small student apartment to sleep that night. At the end of 3rd year, she did a very budget-conscious trip to Rarotonga with friends, and that was cheap flights, inexpensive accommodation, cooking their own meals and just walking everywhere. Otherwise, most holidays were spent working to put some cash aside for university and an eventual house purchase if she could make it work. And she describes herself as very organised and intentional with money during that time. And honestly, student life for Anna wasn't hugely social. During university, there was mostly study, staying home and keeping life fairly quiet. But she was happy enough with that. She enjoyed learning and was very focused on getting in, getting through and getting qualified and out the other side. So Anna was 24 years old by the time she finished her 6-year degree, and even though she was quite intentional about how much she borrowed, her student loan still sat at around $117,000. Unexpectedly and most gratefully received, her parents made a $12,000 payment towards her student loan then, so when she started full-time work in early 2021, her student debt was down to $105,000. But what really stood out was that she also graduated with at least $60,000 in cash, which means that $105,000 of debt minus $60,000 of savings made her total net worth a negative $45,000. So, while still a bit murky for my liking, what with owing money to the government but having savings, all in all, she did a great job of coming out of university after 6 long years with a negative net worth of just $45,000. Given she was heading into a good professional career where her income would grow with experience, by August of 2021, her total savings had already climbed to about $96,000. While she still chose to keep both debt and savings separate, making the minimum payments required of her towards her student loans because she wanted cash savings as a house deposit, the math showed that her net worth was now negative $9,000. She was almost at zero, where in theory, at least, she would have neither assets nor liabilities. And from that point, she could move into a positive net worth, onwards and upwards. What surprised Anna most was her savings rate. In her first year of working, she estimates she saved somewhere between 50 to 70% of her income. She thinks a big part of that was simply that she had become so used to living like a poor student that when her income suddenly increased, her lifestyle, which she was perfectly happy with, barely changed at all. So when Anna started working, she continued living much the same way as she had as a student, simply and just well below her means, except now she suddenly had a full-time income. Her starting salary was around $70,000 a year gross, but she pointed out that it came with incredibly long and stressful hours, often working a 60-hour week on shift work. The starting salary sounded good on paper, but it was by no means an easy 9-to-5 job. Right from the start, she set her KiwiSaver contribution rate to a higher 8%, plus her employer contributions. With a view to buy a house, her thinking would have been to grow this investment. My thinking would have been a bit different. I would have invested in my KiwiSaver with the firm view that this was for retirement only, and I would have taken that additional percentage, which was above the minimum required, and I would have saved that with the bank for a future house purchase. It is so incredibly risky to invest your house deposit in the share market, and KiwiSaver is the share market. In March 2020, just as COVID hit, Anna had a $14,000 term deposit maturing. Interest rates were low, so she split the money in half, putting some into her Invest Now fund and some into her KiwiSaver. And as she put it, she thought that she was hedging her bets by doing it this way, but that's not quite the case. When share markets dropped during the COVID crash, her uncle encouraged her to keep investing, reminding her it was effectively a sale on shares. This uncle is great to have around, in my opinion. She increased her regular investments to $100 a month, though with hindsight she wishes she had invested much more aggressively at the time. But she also recognises that keeping much of her savings in the bank was still the right choice because she still wanted to buy a house. And one of the golden rules of investing is not to put money in the share market if you might need it in the short term, which is why putting that term deposit money into both KiwiSaver and Invest Now, knowing a house purchase was on the cards, was pretty risky. But she did what she did with the information that she had, and I found it really interesting watching her thinking and understanding evolve. Now, at the time, she said that in 2020 and 2021, interest rates were low, but house prices felt extremely high. Anna went to plenty of open homes, but often found the quality of the houses pretty disappointing. So instead of rushing in, she decided to keep saving, keep investing steadily, and wait. And her decision to wait before buying a house ended up creating an unexpected opportunity, because in her second year of working, Anna met her partner Thom, who also works in healthcare and was also looking to buy a home. So just 6 months into their relationship, they bought a house together. Despite being very much in love and already feeling quite aligned in their goals, they were also realistic about how new the relationship actually was. So Anna insisted that they sign a legally binding contracting out agreement. The idea had stuck with her from an old flatmate who once told her, after 3 years together, someone can take half of your money. By now, she had a good amount, so both Anna and Thom agreed it was sensible to clearly understand where they each stood financially if the relationship ever ended. This way, they would both get back what they put in and split the rest evenly. They bought a small 82 square metre 2-bedroom house in a lower socioeconomic area for $560,000. It was the smallest house in the best condition that they could find. They borrowed $352,000 from the bank and pulled together a $208,000 deposit using all of Anna's KiwiSaver, some of her cash savings, and half of Thom's KiwiSaver. Anna essentially reset her retirement savings back to zero after spending years learning about compounding interest and long-term investing. She had given herself such a head start on retirement, but had now ended that advantage, sadly. The bank was very willing to lend them much more money, but neither of them felt comfortable taking on larger debt. Even so, Anna said she still felt completely unprepared for the scale of the decision. She remembers being overwhelmed trying to understand mortgage structures and said it took her weeks to work through the options properly when they refixed the mortgage in 2024. And looking back, she says, people shouldn't underestimate how serious buying a house is. It's a huge financial commitment and an incredibly illiquid asset, not something you can easily reverse if it no longer suits your life. And in reality, the house never really did suit them particularly well. It had lawns and gardens neither of them wanted, and both knew their careers would likely take them elsewhere in the future, but they effectively did what everyone else advised them was a good idea to do. They now had a house of their own and a monthly mortgage payment until such time as they paid it off. By late 2023, after Anna started listening to the Happy Saver podcast, they began properly tracking their money for the first time. Once they added up the mortgage, the insurance, the rates, the repairs, and the maintenance, they realised the true cost of owning the home was much, much higher than they had expected, far higher than the rent that she used to pay. They also worked out that if they moved away for work and rented the property out, the rent they could charge simply wouldn't be enough to cover their costs. It would have been what I call an accidental investment property, something that sounds good in theory, but often doesn't work once you run the numbers properly. And as the Donegans say on Rebel Finance School, an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, and this one simply wouldn't. In 2024, Anna and Thom decided to keep a few things separate, but when it came to the big stuff, they mostly combined their finances. Anna said that listening to couples that turned up on the Happy Saver podcast talk openly about money, it helped shift her thinking away from my money and your money towards our money. And she realised she wanted to build a long life with Thom, so it made sense to start having deeper conversations about finances too. At first, those conversations felt awkward and a little confrontational, even impolite at times, but gradually they became much more comfortable talking about spending, saving, their goals, and the financial podcast Anna had been listening to. So over several months, Thom realised that these conversations, they were not going to go away. So instead of resisting them, and much to his credit, I think he leaned in, and together they decided to combine their finances. So once Anna discovered a few resources talking about financial independence, she said she couldn't really unsee the possibilities. And when they discussed them, it completely changed how she and Thom thought about their future. Up until then, they had simply been following the standard advice that they'd always heard. You buy a house, you get on the property ladder, and you hold on to it no matter what. But suddenly they had new information that showed them that there might be another path entirely. They wondered if they should own a home at all. Now, the idea of selling the house felt very against the grain. Most people around them would have kept it and turned it into a rental property, but once Anna ran those numbers, she simply couldn't make the math work. It did take Thom some time to come around to the idea of selling, she said, but eventually he did, and Anna describes him as a very patient partner who tolerates her dreams and schemes. Now, clearly in search of information about money, in 2025 they completed Rebel Finance School, which helped them look even more objectively at their finances. And interestingly, Anna almost ignored Rebel Finance School at first because, as she puts it, the name sounded a bit ridiculous, school, whatever. But after hearing me talk about it repeatedly on this podcast, and in my blog I should point out, she eventually listened to the episode I recorded with Alan and Katie Donegan, and she watched some of their YouTube videos, and she realised that they were relatable, thoughtful, and probably just a little bit nerdy like her too, she said. And ultimately, after using the Rebel Finance School spreadsheet tools to run some of her own numbers, they decided to sell their home. They had bought it for $560,000 near the peak of the market at the end of 2022, and they sold it in early 2026 for $575,000, so only $15,000 more than what they paid. But once real estate fees and legal costs were deducted, they came out behind financially. Over the 3 years they owned the property, they also paid more than $37,000 in mortgage interest alone, plus rates, insurance and maintenance and what have you. Now, Anna found herself increasingly frustrated by the common narrative that home ownership is always financially superior to renting. People constantly told them things like safe as houses and you can't lose money in property, but their own experience showed it simply isn't always that straightforward. She later read J.L. Collins, who wrote a blog post called Why Your Home is a Terrible Investment, and by the time they had fully run the numbers, the decision to sell felt surprisingly clear. In total, after real estate agent and lawyers' fees and the $210,000 mortgage was repaid, and they'd made a huge dent in that mortgage over the 3 years they'd lived in the house, they received $340,000 in total. Now, as per their contracting out agreement, they both got their own deposits back, and the remainder was paid into their joint bank account. So onwards and upwards, they found a lovely, newly built, warm and modern home to rent, one with a tiny garden that the landlord tends, and it has a double garage for their car and their bikes, and she feels like they live in a palace now compared to their old house. It is so nice and modern, she said. It perfectly fits with their lifestyle, and they now pay $750 a week in rent, plus power and internet, and for them, the simplicity of paying rent and the flexibility of renting feel completely worth it. Anna said not having the house anymore feels like they have their freedom back, and if and when their careers take them elsewhere, they can give notice and leave. So now aged 29 and 32, Anna and Thom not only feel like they have regained their freedom, but they also have strong incomes and a clear plan for building wealth in a way that better suits the life they want. Now, they each still have some student loan debt. The balance of her student loan is now down to just $40,000, and she has made excellent inroads on it, above and beyond her 12% deductions from her income. But due to it being interest-free, and now with a much better understanding of investing will take priority now. Thom also has a remaining student loan of about $20,000, which is getting paid down pretty quickly now via 12% deductions from his rising income, and they both feel that time will wipe both of these loans out. So moving on, here is a breakdown of how they are invested now. So Anna earns around $125,000 a year and expects her income to continue to grow as her career progresses. Thom, who was a few years ahead in his own career and currently works longer hours, he is earning about $175,000. Together, they now bring in roughly $300,000 a year before tax, and with incomes like that, combined with their low spending habits, they have enormous potential to build wealth quickly. And I think you're about to be surprised at just how quickly. But it's also important to remember that none of this happened overnight. Anna is building on an incredibly strong foundation of consistently saving for years. She saved money while she was at school. She kept saving all throughout university. And even when she and Thom had a mortgage, they were still aggressively building wealth by making much larger mortgage payments than they were required to. And now, instead of pouring that surplus money into debt, they're redirecting it into investments that can actually grow over time. It's a bit like a snowball gathering more snow as it rolls down a hill. The longer they keep going, the faster the momentum starts to build. Their goal now is to continue to move as much of their after-tax income as possible into investments in order to build a portfolio large enough to eventually replace their working income altogether. While their investment mix is still a work in progress, they are moving in the right direction. And as of May 2026, the size of their investment portfolio, or what Rebel Finance School calls a freedom fund, plus cash, sits at around $790,000. Yep, you heard that right, $790,000 invested. While Rebel Finance School generally teaches a very simple investing approach of just buying a single global index fund and just leaving it alone, Anna and Thom's own investing is currently a bit more of a pick and mix arrangement due to the provider they are using not quite offering the funds they want, but they are generally in some big funds. Anna already had her own Invest Now account before they met, and this is where she originally placed much of the money from the sale of the house, and now she has an Invest Now US 500 fund where her former house deposit money sits. She has a Kernel Global ESG fund because Kernel doesn't yet offer a Total World Fund option. I'm recording this in early June 2026, and I know that one is coming. And a small Naitahu growth fund investment where contributions are matched up to $200 per year. Her KiwiSaver is also with Invest Now in the US 500 fund. Thom's KiwiSaver is with MAS and invested in international equities, and he also has a Sharesies account, which, by the way she explained it, is not up to that much. Together, they've also opened a joint Kernel Global ESG fund. Again, their preference would be a Total World Fund, where they invested the proceeds from selling the house, and they continue adding aggressively to it every fortnight. It will be really interesting to see how or if this selection of providers and funds merges and evolves over time, because throughout our investing kōrero, Anna's active mind is constantly ticking over and thinking about opportunities, so watch this space, I think. Interestingly, Anna and Thom have made the deliberate decision not to have private health insurance. Given their experience working within the healthcare system, Anna feels New Zealand's public system will cover most major health issues adequately, and instead they've chosen to self-insure, which with the benefit of being young, they can do. They invest $200 a fortnight into a Simplicity Global share fund with the long-term view that those investments will eventually help pay for future healthcare costs like hip replacements, knee surgery or cataracts if needed later in life, that the wait in the public system might be too long for and that they can pay and do privately. Alongside that, they also keep a separate health sinking fund in cash, contributing another $100 a fortnight to cover more immediate expenses like GP visits or dental work and other everyday medical costs. In addition to their investments, between them, Anna and Thom currently hold about $170,000 in cash savings, although part of that is Thom's share of the former house deposit, which he hasn't quite yet decided how to invest. The rest is spread across a number of sinking funds for things like emergencies, bills, transport holidays, and just general household costs. They've done a great job of keeping what they have calculated is for them the right amount of cash for upcoming expenses and emergencies liquid and ready to use if needed. While some of their money sits with traditional banks, much of it is held with providers like Kernel and Booster because they offer higher returns on cash savings. But a recent conversation with a former podcast guest actually reminded me that it's important to understand these products are not quite the same as a normal bank account. A traditional bank account is effectively you lending money to a bank, whereas cash funds through providers like Kernel or Booster are managed investment funds made up of diversified cash-like investments. They can feel very similar because you can access the money relatively easily, but they do not have the same guarantees or, importantly, protections as standard bank deposits. They are not protected by the depositor compensation scheme. And this became very real to me recently when this former guest told me that she had her entire emergency fund stolen from her Booster account. She had invested with them because they offered that higher interest rate for savings. Thankfully, the money was eventually replaced, but it was still an immensely stressful reminder that people need to properly understand where their cash is held, how secure it is, and what protections do and do not exist. Overall, though, Anna and Thom are in a very strong financial position, with assets of around $960,000 and debts of roughly $60,000. Their net worth, the real measure of wealth, sits at approximately $900,000 by their late 20s and early 30s. While their investing is still a little all over the place, and Anna admits that they're probably holding too much cash, they're also relatively new to this phase of their financial life, having only sold the house in early 2026. And my guess is, like I said before, that over time they'll continue simplifying and refining their investment approach and the investments they hold jointly and individually. I think they provide such an excellent example to others their age of what is possible without owning a home. And importantly, they're already seeing the power of investing. Using the commonly discussed 4 to 5% withdrawal guideline, a portfolio of $900,000 could theoretically generate somewhere between $36,000 and $45,000 per year in cash. Given their rent is about $39,000 a year, their investments are already approaching the point where they could effectively cover their housing costs. So they are very clearly moving in a strong direction financially. Collectively, although it does vary week to week, they are making about $3,250 a week, and after rent this still leaves them $2,500 a week to cover all of their expenses and invest. Anna said there is a completely different feeling when your surplus income goes into investments instead of disappearing into a mortgage payment. Rather than feeling stretched, she said she now feels genuine sense of abundance. And one thing that really surprised her was just how quickly invested money can grow. She said that at one point, rising share markets increased their net worth so much in a single week that it genuinely shocked her. And I know that feeling. Johnny and I have a similar amount invested ourselves, and 2026 feels like it has been a particularly strong year. Since 2023, Anna has tracked her spending carefully and built spreadsheets using her real historical expenses to estimate her future costs. So, for example, she worked out what they've spent on groceries across an entire year, and she's divided that by 26 fortnights and used that figure to determine exactly how much money should be transferred to that particular sinking fund in each pay cycle. In 2026, their grocery spending averages around $92 a week, actually a little higher than the year before, she said. Instead of relying solely on supermarkets, they shop around at places like Indian supermarkets and local produce stores, where prices are often far cheaper. And Anna highly recommends students and young people look beyond the major supermarkets and simply Google local alternatives nearby. And what I liked about this approach was that it wasn't random or aspirational budgeting, it was evidence-based. She simply looked at what they'd actually spent in previous years and she planned from there. All of their bank transfers are now automated into various savings and investment accounts. They also each have separate guilt-free spending accounts where they can spend money however they like without needing to justify it to the other person. Not that justify is even the right word here. They run expenses past each other out of courtesy when it comes to a joint expense. Transport is another area where they've dramatically reduced costs. In April, they spent nothing on petrol at all. In March, it was $81, February just $77, and Anna drives a small second-hand Toyota, but after she and Thom got together, she started questioning whether they really needed cars when both barely drove. Because parking at work was expensive and inconvenient anyway, so in 2023 they both bought e-bikes instead, and Anna paid about $4,500 for hers and Thom around $5,500. And they now use them almost every day as their main form of transport alongside public transport. And for Anna, it wasn't just financial, environmental values played a big role too. They've also made other deliberate decisions around insurance. They don't have life insurance or income protection insurance because they currently have no children, they can financially support one another, and they have created wills leaving everything to each other. And when Anna looked at their total April spending, the total came to just under $4,000 for the whole month. It was a remarkably low spend month. And Anna has calculated that their core annual spending, excluding holidays and investing, it sits around $64,000 a year. And given their $300,000 gross income, they are investing that gap, which explains the size of their investment pool after quite a short period of time. And now, at the moment, they invest roughly 41% of their take-home pay and have an overall savings rate of around 62%. So using a rough 4% rule, which is 25 times your annual expenses, that would suggest they need investments of around $1.6 million to support that lifestyle long-term. So where are Anna and Thom heading from here? Their goal is financial independence, which is known as FIRE, the point where work becomes optional rather than compulsory. And if they hit that goal of $1.6 million invested, they will achieve FIRE. And what's becoming increasingly exciting for them is seeing how quickly momentum builds once investing starts compounding. They're already sitting at around $780,000 invested, plus those savings, while continuing to aggressively add to those investments every single fortnight. Now I'm nearing the end, but before I wrap up, I have another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try PocketSmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. That's pocketsmith.com/thehappysaver. For Anna, FIRE doesn't mean never working again. She has invested a lot of time and a lot of money into her career, as has Thom, and she suspects she'll continue doing some form of work, paid or unpaid, for a long time because she genuinely enjoys parts of her career. But what financial independence represents to her is freedom and the ability to choose whether to work or not. And that freedom matters deeply to her, especially after years of intense study and demanding work. She and Thom both feel that being young, healthy, and currently without children, it gives them flexibility that they want to fully appreciate while they have it. Thom is keen to eventually stop working altogether, while Anna dreams of being able to travel slowly for months at a time, something that felt impossible during years of study and throughout the disruption of COVID. And importantly, they're already beginning to experience what financial independence can look like in practice. You don't have to be fully FIRE to have a taste of that freedom. Last year, Anna reached a point where she needed a rest and a break from work, so she stepped away for a few months. Because they had organised their finances carefully and they had strong cash savings, investments, and Thom was still working, she was able to do that without panic or financial stress, even while they still had a mortgage at that time. But after a few months, she felt ready to return to work again, and she is a better worker because of this ability to reset. And that really is financial independence in action. Not necessarily retiring early tomorrow, but creating enough financial margin that you gain flexibility, breathing room, and choices. Anna said sometimes she has to stop and pinch herself at the life that they've created already. Her view is that if you earn a good income, but avoid lifestyle creep, the options that open up are enormous. Rather than spending more and more to save time or for the convenience, she believes living on less ultimately buys something much more valuable, which is freedom over your time and your life. Now, I really think Anna and Thom are living quite differently from many people at a similar stage of life and with similar incomes. And what I particularly liked about their story was that they did follow the traditional path into home ownership, but once they realised it wasn't actually the right fit for them, they were willing to course correct instead of blindly sticking with it because society told them that they should. They've already shown that you absolutely can financially plan for your future without owning a house, and personally, I think they currently have far more freedom and flexibility than many of their peers. So that is why I was so looking forward to sharing Anna's story today, and honestly, I'd love to check back in with them again in a few years' time because I suspect this is only the beginning of what they'll build together. So that's all from me this week, and a massive thank you to Anna and Thom for sharing your enthusiasm with me. Now, if you want to get in touch, you can find me over at my blog, thehappysaver.com, where I share a lot of information about how I manage money in my life. Plus, if you sign up for my fortnightly email, I'm always just linking to other useful personal finance blogs and podcasts and books and just money-related content. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you took a few nuggets of wisdom from this episode that you can now go and apply to your own life. And please do share The Happy Saver with your friends. It's still the very best way that people can learn about the podcast. And I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.